Well, welcome everyone to our fifth week in our Dwelling with God series. We are at the halfway point tonight, meaning that we have 4 sessions to go, including tonight. That's 4 sessions with tonight. So let me do a little bit of math here. 1,186 chapters in the Bible, minus the 11 that we've gone through. Is just 1,175 divided by 4. Okay, so basically we're good. All we have to do is cover 293 chapters a week, and we'll be fine. So no problem here with getting to the end. Well, obviously I am sweating a little bit, going, how are we going to get to that end, dwelling with God in Revelation 20 and 21? But you know, I'm sure that we'll get there. I'm sure that God will guide us and that we will get there. I know I told you in the beginning I didn't have much of a plan for this summer, but suffice to say that I wouldn't have expected that we'd be in Genesis 12 halfway through our series. But the bottom line is I'm finding it hard to just kind of pass over certain people and events. I didn't think that we were going to spend a week on Noah and the flood in the beginning. Somehow, I don't know how now in retrospect, but somehow I thought I was just going to be able to pass over Abraham and just go right to Mount Sinai, but I'm finding it very hard to do so, which means that it's probably wrong to do so, which means that we're not going to. So we are going to talk a bit this week about Abraham and his story, and trust that God enables us still to have enough time to do this theme of dwelling with God justice in the end. So let's get right to it. Man has displayed in the first 11 chapters of Genesis his complete inability to fulfill the purpose for which he was created. Not just to image God, but also to be in his likeness, to be like God, to do what God does in heaven, but to do that on earth, to extend his reign to this earth, to guard and keep the holy place sacred so that you can dwell with God, to rule and reign and subdue the earth, extending that garden dwelling to the ends of the whole earth. From the garden in the beginning, through the flood, to the Tower of Babel, it is clear that humans cannot and will not fulfill the purpose for which they were created. Now, as we talked about last week, because God disperses the people at the Tower of Babel, instead of destroying them again like he did in the flood, there's at least a glimmer of hope that God's purpose for humans hasn't changed. There's a glimmer of hope that God disperses instead of destroying. But unless there is something more for man after that dispersion, unless there's something more than just another chance for man to get it right, it really seems quite hopeless for humans after the Tower of Babel. And so after Babel, we are really kind of at a crossroads in the story there. We know that God is not finished with man, but we also know that man is not fit to dwell with God. And so what's next? What's next in the story? And with that question kind of lingering after Babel, with that question just kind of hanging in the air, what's next? Chapter 11 then concludes with a genealogy that leads us to a man called Abram. And in chapter 12, that chapter opens with the call of God upon Abram's life. Genesis 12, verses 1 through 4. Now the Lord said to Abram, "Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. And I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." So Abram went, as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abraham was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. Now, while this call of Abraham does not have all of the elements of the first 2 exoduses that we've looked at, Exodus from non-life to new life and dwelling with God, Eden and Ararat, in other words, there's still enough here to show us that God is moving in this. This is a continuation of that theme of dwelling with God. That God is moving in and through the life of Abraham to ultimately accomplish the same thing that he has purposed for humans from the very beginning. We see that the purpose of God hasn't changed here. And so here again, we see that there's another Exodus kind of format with Abraham. He has to come from his father's household and go to a land that God will show him, right? So we see that same kind of format, from something to something else. There's another progenitor or another head of offspring or of people. Just like Noah is the head and his offspring will come after, and Adam is a head. There's another progenitor here and more people, more offspring. And that's important that we see a head and an offspring here, because thus far it's not just been about what the head, the progenitor, does. It's also been about how the head's failure, Adam and Noah, how that failure cascades their offspring, how that failure cascades the offsprings into the worst kind of corruption and evil. And so we have a new head here of a people, Abram. But in this case, we are told that Abram and his offspring, that their story does not end in failure. It ends with humans actually doing what they were created to do. We see here in this call of Abram that Abram and his offspring, that God is going to be fruitful and multiply. He's going to make Abram into a great nation. That's verse 2, but that harkens back to the original command, to be fruitful and multiply. We see here that Abram and his offspring are going to flourish in and through God's resources. Also in verse 2, God says, I will bless you. They're not only going to be blessed, but they will be a blessing to others. That blessing will extend out, even as it was supposed to extend out after and from Eden, in the Garden of Eden. This is actually man's mission on earth, to extend that blessing out to the ends of the earth. And this is what Abraham is told here in his call, verse 3, that in you all of the nations of the earth will be blessed. So what we're seeing here is that not only has God's purpose for man not changed, but we also see here that his purpose for man is actually going to be accomplished in and through Abraham and his offspring, right? That's what we're seeing here in this call. Now, how in the world is that going to happen? How is Abraham and his offspring going to finally and forever fulfill God's purpose for humans when other progenitors and their offsprings before him have failed? Well, God tells Abraham and us how in these verses. Notice all of the I wills. I will do this. This is the point. This is what's different. This is why Abraham is going to succeed. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you. I will show you. I will bless those who bless you. I will curse those who curse you. In you, all of the families of the earth shall be blessed. And so God is making it clear here that this endeavor with Abram and his offspring is going to result in human beings actually becoming what they were meant to be. God actually fulfilling his purpose. And he's ensuring the process, because he's saying, in this case now, I'm going to be the one that does it. I am going to do it. Abraham and his offspring will be fruitful. They will multiply. They will flourish because of walking in relationship with God. And that flourishing will extend to the rest of the world, because God says, I'm going to do it. I'm going to be the one that makes it happen. And this is seen at the initial call of Abraham in chapter 12 here. But as this covenant and this covenantal relationship continues on with God and Abraham, as it unfolds, mainly Genesis 15 or 12 and then 15 and then 17, this covenant between God and Abraham further unfolds, and we see more and more that God is actually going to fulfill his purpose for humans in and through Abraham and his offspring. Chapter 17, 24 years after the initial call, it says this: when Abram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to Abram and said, actually that's 14 years, right? No, it is 24 years. Never mind. When Abram was 99 years old, and the Lord appeared to Abraham and said to him, I am God Almighty. Walk before me and be blameless. Walking with God. Again, this is what God intended from the beginning. that I may make my covenant between me and you, and may multiply you greatly. Then Abram fell on his face, and God said to him, Behold, my covenant is with you, and you shall be the father of a multitude of nations. Now what he promised in the call is becoming a covenant, a guarantee here. You shall be the father of a multitude of nations. No longer shall your name be called Abram, but your name shall be Abraham. For I have made you, here's the work of God again, I have made you the father of a multitude of nations. I will make you exceedingly fruitful. I will make you into nations, and kings shall come from you. Kings. Kings shall come from you. That's interesting, isn't it? Kings. You know, in the whole Old Testament, only 3 people were said to have a great name. The first is, of course, Yahweh, the great name of the Lord, right? Yahweh's name is great. Another one is King David. King David is said to have a great name. King David is also called God's anointed son. And the point of that sonship is that if God Almighty has a son, that makes the son royal as well. So David is God's son, meaning he is God's anointed king. But then also the third person is Abraham. Abraham is told that God will make his name great, which is kind of weird because that's what's wrong. That's at Babel. You remember they were trying to make their own name great. But here God actually says, I will make your name great. And really what that means is just like with David, it's God is saying, I am going to make you like my royal son. Me, the King of Heaven, are going to call you my son. And that makes you royalty, which explains why kings will come from you, right? And that also harkens back to God's intent in the beginning for humans, right? In the beginning, God intended for Adam and Eve to rule and reign as kings and queens. It was a royal position that they were in, to rule and reign with him, like him, on this part of his kingdom, the earth. Verse 7 continues. I don't think we have a slide for that, but I'll just read you that this covenant continues. And I will establish my covenant between me and you and your offspring and after you throughout their generations for an everlasting covenant. Everlasting, to be God to you and to your offspring after you. So God here not only promises to fulfill his purpose for humanity in and through Abraham and his offspring, it is also a promise that when that happens, that flourishing, that dwelling with God that happens in fulfillment of these promises is never going to end. It won't end like it did in Eden, like it did at Ararat. In this case, it's not going to end. By the way, Abraham and his offspring are going to fail, and fail often. Repeatedly. But God is promising here that in spite of those failures, unlike the failure of Adam and Eve that lost that dwelling, or Noah that lost that dwelling, the failures with Abraham here, God is promising in this promise that he is going to provide a way such that those failures don't nullify this covenant promise, right? So he's saying you're going to flourish, you're going to achieve what I intended for humans to achieve, what humans were created to do, and that flourishing, in spite of human failures, is never going to end. It is going to go on forever. Now, here's a question. Who are Abraham's offspring? Who are Abraham's offspring? Who is it that will flourish as God's people and ultimately bless the whole earth and ultimately fulfill God's purpose for humanity? This is an important question, isn't it? It's a very important question. It's a relevant question. It's a question that's being asked a lot right now on podcasts. I'm not talking about eschatology or anything, how the end times play out. I'm just saying, from the perspective of looking at Abraham's promise here, this is an important question. Who is Abraham's offspring? Because this is going to change the whole rest of the way that we understand the Bible from this point on. And it also affects how we view the gospel when we get to the New Testament. Because there is going to be a nation of people who are ethnically united together in and through the Mosaic law, the law of Moses, and who are also mostly by race Abraham's offspring through Isaac and then through Jacob. And God will flourish that nation, and God does dwell with that nation in a unique way above all other nations. And that nation is supposed to be a nation of priests and kings. That same command is for that nation. And that nation, Israel, was commissioned to be a blessing to all other nations. But the question is the offspring of Abraham here in Abraham's covenant, is that the whole ethnic nation of Israel? Is that what's being described here? All those who are eternally blessed and ultimately fulfill God's purpose for man and dwell with him are the offspring. Is that the offspring that is being described here of Abraham's covenant? The whole nation of Israel, meaning all those who are ethnically identified through the Mosaic law and racially tied to Abraham. Are they the offspring who are eternally blessed here? Maybe them and anyone else who blesses them as a people. That when they bless that nation, they are blessed as well and included into this promise. Is that who is Abraham's offspring here? Israel and anyone who blesses them. Well, again, I'm not making a statement about how end times. This is not an eschatology class. But in case you guys missed it, in the New Testament, one of Paul's main points that he continues to make in his gospel presentations is that being ethnically identified by the Mosaic law or being racially tied to Abraham does not get you into the family of God. That's one of the fundamental things that Paul includes in his gospel message. He says that there are blessings associated with being an Israelite. Automatic entrance into the covenant blessing of Abraham is not one of those blessings. Paul makes that very clear. That entrance into God's family is not based on race or ethnicity. And by the way, we should instinctually understand that that is true. Because if being an Israelite by race or ethnicity brought you into the covenant blessing of Abraham, then the Christian church would not have been founded on the testimony of 13 men who were Jews by race. And then later, 3,000 who were at least Jews in terms of their ethnicity at Pentecost. All of those Jewish people by race and ethnicity realized that their race and ethnicity alone could not enter them into the family of God or make them partakers of the eternal covenant that is given to Abraham in Genesis 12, 15, and 17. They knew, those first Jews, Israelites that embraced Christ, they knew, even before Paul explicitly stated it, who were the true inheritors of Abraham's blessing. And they knew it was people of faith. People of faith. Paul says in Galatians 3:7, "Know then that it is those of faith who are the sons of Abraham." It is those of faith. 3:9, "So then those who are of faith are blessed along with Abraham, the man of faith." Now, of course, that doesn't exclude all of the benefits of God putting his favor upon Israel. And it doesn't exclude all of the benefits that come of that. But it doesn't exclude Jewish people anyway. But what that means is it doesn't automatically include people into that covenant of blessing and flourishing and being God's people simply because you're genetically tied to Abraham. And in fact, Paul will go on to explain in Galatians why being ethnically and genetically tied to Abraham doesn't automatically make you his offspring and include you in his eternal covenant blessing. And in this, we really see how faith is the vehicle into this family. Paul says in Galatians 3:16, "Now the promises were made to Abraham and his offspring." It doesn't say, "and to offsprings." referring to many, but referring to one, and to your offspring. Paul is quoting Genesis 12 when this promise is given to Abraham. He says that promise is to Abraham and your offspring, one who is Christ. Offspring in Hebrew, zerah, is a collective noun, which means that it's singular in its grammatical form, but it can be used in a plural context, like the word seed, right? Singular in grammatical form, but it can be used in a plural context. And so Paul is explaining here that God chose a collective noun in that covenant promise because as time unfolds, in a partial way, in and through the nation of Israel, those promises are going to be fulfilled in a plural sense, with more than one person through the nation of Israel as that nation is developed. Those promises, in a way, they will be partially fulfilled. Abraham's genetic offspring, in the plural context, will walk with God in a certain way. And they will experience blessing and flourishing because of it. But ultimately, this is the point that Paul is making. Ultimately, Abraham's offspring, plural, the nation of Israel, are not the offspring that fills the earth with image bearers. It's not the plural offspring of Abraham, those physical descendants, that fulfills the purpose of God for humans on the face of the earth. No, Paul is saying that will happen not through the offspring plural, but through the offspring singular. The one true offspring of Abraham, who, by the way, perfected the faith in the end that Abraham practiced in the beginning. These are the bookends of the family. This is how you're actually entered into the family of Abraham. It's because by faith you're united with who? The offspring that this promise was given to. And so Paul's point here is that if you want to be part of the eternal covenant blessing that was given to Abraham, and again, I know that some of you are thinking that I'm saying something about the future. I'm not. I'm talking about this covenant, right? The point that Paul is making is that if you want to be entered into this covenantal blessing that was given to Abraham and his offspring, if you want to walk with God and flourish and do what humans were created to do, then you have to become a part of the family of God by faith. That's the point that he's making, by faith. It's been that way, by the way, from Abraham on. Paul actually explains that even though that the Mosaic law came 430 years later, that doesn't nullify the covenant. The covenant is a covenant of faith. The law of Moses didn't all of a sudden save you through that law. He says no one, not a single soul was ever justified before God by keeping the law. The only way into the family of God is through faith. Begins with Abraham. He practiced a walk of faith. Christ perfected a walk of faith. Abraham's story is when walking and dwelling with God by faith is first introduced in the Bible. And that doesn't mean that he's the first one to have faith, by the way. Even the writer of Hebrews will say that Abel was a man of faith, that Enoch was a man of faith. Remember, he walked with God. And that Noah had faith, that he was a man that walked with God. But Abraham, and his story is when we see that this walking by faith is how God will do in man what man cannot do in and of himself. This is when we see God's plan for man. God is going to provide a way at the time of Abraham, and through this covenant with Abraham, God is going to provide a way for man to walk with him in spite of his failures. Right? Remember, man's failures are what kicks him out of the garden. What destroys the generations after Noah's fall. God is going to provide a way here at the time of Abraham that man can walk with him in spite of his failures, so that prolonged walk with God will progressively transform and make you more and more into his likeness and image as you walk with him, in the same way that prolonged walking with idols will transform you into the image of that idol. So Abraham is where this shift happens. God doesn't give a man another shot at a holy mountain where he must be perfect in order to retain that dwelling with God. Rather, he says, I'm going to take you to a holy mountain. I'm going to take you to an eternal dwelling place with me, but I'm going to provide a way for you to walk with me on the way, so that when you get to that home, you're at home there. You're very much like me because you've walked with me through the process. The walk of faith is God's plan. From Abraham forward, that's God's plan. That's God's answer to the problem that's created in the first 11 chapters. Chapter 12, you're going to now walk with me. I'm going to provide a way for you to walk with me. And that way is by faith. And how does faith facilitate a walk with God? How does faith provide the way to walk with God? We see it in Abraham's story. It's in verse 6, Genesis 15:6. And he, Abraham, believed the Lord. There's the faith, right? He believed the Lord, and he, the Lord, counted it to Abraham as righteousness. That's how God enables flawed, unrighteous people to walk with him, so that they can dwell with him in the end, because he's decided that belief equals the righteousness of God. God says, if you believe that I will do in you what you cannot do in and of yourself, if you trust that I will take you to what you were created for, if you trust that I can flourish you on this earth, if you believe, then I've decided to consider you righteous. I've decided to call you righteous, the righteousness of God. And what does that do? It makes you fit to walk with God. And of course, we know later how someone that is not perfect can be considered righteous. It's because you're found in Christ. It's because you're united with Christ. But this is what God is introducing here with Abraham. He says, you walk with me. I'm not going to start you on the mountain. I'm going to walk you to the holy dwelling place. And you can walk with me by faith, because I'm going to count your faith as righteousness. This is the gospel truth, church. Isn't it? This is the gospel in chapter 12 of Genesis, that we are made fit to walk with God because he counts our faith as his righteousness. And through this walk, we are progressively made like him, such that we are perfectly at home in the end of the journey when we're dwelling with him forever. This is the wonderful gospel that is given right here in the Bible, right after all hope is lost in humanity at Babel. God provides a way for us to now walk with him in spite of our failures, such that we actually are made like him through the journey, such that we're at home with him in the end. And that way is the way of faith. Now, what I want to do now with the remainder of our time, and with Abraham as our model, is I want to talk about the kind of faith and trust that God counts as righteous. That's an important thing, isn't it? The kind of faith that God actually will count as righteousness and allow us to walk with God so that we can dwell with him in the end. Does any kind of faith do that? Does any kind of faith, any measure of faith, any object of faith, just faith, if it says faith, that's good enough. I'm going to call that as righteous. This is an important thing to talk about. So I want to, from Abraham's life, or using Abraham as a model, look at and point out some things that would kind of qualify what faith is. What is the right kind of faith? And we can't read through the whole account of Abraham's life. Maybe after this, or on another occasion, you can sit down and read through all those chapters and find out other things regarding his faith. But I'm just going to point out 4 things from the account. From my quick study through his life, I want to point out 4 things from the account that I think help us understand the kind of faith that God will count as righteousness. The kind of faith that will unite you or with Christ, so that you can walk with God and dwell with him forever in the end, being transformed in the process. The first thing I want to point out regarding the kind of faith that works is that faith imperfectly moves you. And all of those words are important. Faith imperfectly moves you. Back at chapter 12 in the call, now the Lord said to Abram, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. Verse 4, so Abraham went, as the Lord told him. I know that we go overboard. We go overboard because of the abuses and how much works have been associated and legalism have been associated with faith. We go overboard to make the distinction that man is justified before God, declared righteous. By the way, that's what's happening when you're justified. You're declared righteous, not guilty. We go overboard to make the distinction that man is justified before God, declared righteous by his faith apart from his works. But that does not mean that a faith without works is the kind of faith that justifies a man before God. God does not count just any kind of faith that doesn't produce any kind of works as a kind of faith that he calls righteous. That's what we see here. God is using Abraham, and in using Abraham as the model of faith, he's revealing that there's a certain kind of faith that he will count as righteous, and it's the kind of faith that Abraham has. Which is to say that it is a faith that does not just enable you to declare something, it is rather a faith that compels you to do something. Let me say that again. It is not a faith that enables you to declare something. It is a faith that compels you to do something. And what is it that it compels you to do, this right kind of faith? It compels you to move in the direction that God is leading you. That's what the right kind of faith will do. It'll compel you to move you into the direction that God is leading. In other words, can Abraham experience these covenant blessings and walking with God if he says, Lord, I fully believe every single word that comes out of your mouth, every jot and tittle. I believe everything. I believe it all. I believe that you're powerful. I believe that you can do that. In fact, I believe that you are so powerful that you can do all of those things if I just stay right here in Haran. Of course not. The kind of faith that works is a faith that works, right? It is a trust in the Lord that compels a person to place his life into the Lord's hands and then go where the Lord is leading. Even, by the way, even before you know entirely where the Lord is going to lead you. We see that here as well. God says to Abraham, I'll show you the land, but you need to leave Haran and follow me if you want to see it. How often do we say, I have complete faith in you, Lord. If you show me the land, I'll totally leave and go to it. That's not the kind of faith or trust that God counts as righteous. That's not the kind of faith that enables us to walk with Him. That's simply saying, let me compare what I gain to what I lose, and let me decide if it's worth it. That's not faith. That's just seeing if God has good taste. That's just seeing if He considers the same things good and meaningful as you do. True faith trusts in God. True faith says, your vision for flourishing must be better than mine. It must be better than mine. And you trust in God, and you move in the direction He's leading. And how do you know that? How do you know? Like how do I know if I have that kind of faith? You move. That's the point. Faith that works. It moves you, compels you to move in the direction that the Lord is leading you. God requires. That's the faith that God calls righteous. That's the requirement, that it moves you in the direction that He's leading. Now, He's not requiring that move is perfect. He's not requiring that you move in the direction that He's leading perfectly. You won't. If adequate faith required perfection, none of us would have it, including Abraham. Abraham didn't follow perfectly. He took more than what he was supposed to take. He took a lot. I'm going to let it sink in. Right? He took a lot more. There you go. No, it's worth it. It's worth it. I deserve that. Abraham went as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. He wasn't supposed to bring his kindred. That was not part of the plan. He was supposed to leave his father's house and his kindred people. And he didn't. He didn't do that perfectly, right? And by the way, this is only one of many, many mistakes that Abraham makes in his life there. He makes his wife act like his sister twice. Twice. I think it had to be a miracle from God that Sarah even wanted to be fruitful and multiply with him. So the kind of faith that works is not, it's not a perfect. It's not that you are perfect, but it's a faith that works. It moves you in the direction of God's will, albeit imperfect. But God doesn't require perfection, but He requires that you move. He requires that you trust Him enough to say, I'm going to follow, right? And that hasn't changed from Old Testament to New Testament. That's Jesus' command, isn't it? Follow me. Well, where are we going, Lord? Let me see if I want to follow. Trust me, you don't want to know where we're going. It's more enjoyable if you just follow me, if you just trust me. And it is. But that's what faith requires. It moves, it compels you to move in the direction that God is leading. We also see from Abraham's account that true faith unavoidably humbles you. It unavoidably humbles you. Abraham's life displays this because what God promised to do in Abraham's life was not possible without God. But again, this is the whole point of a walk of faith. This is the whole point of a walk of faith, that you must humble yourself. You must accept that what needs to be done can't be done in your life unless God does it. And then the next step is to trust in God that He will do it. But the first step of that process is a humbling and saying what needs to be done in my life can't be done by me. It necessarily humbles you. A walk of faith is not just that you trust in God to do the things that you could do yourself. It's just you don't want to do them. Or maybe God does them better than you. I could do them myself, but God does them, a little bit more efficient than me. That's not what faith is. Faith is trusting in God to do what you cannot do. And that admission that you cannot do it requires humility. Absolute humility. Abraham was 75. And this wasn't the time when people were living to 900. Abraham was 75 and childless and married to a barren woman when God told him that He would make him into a great nation of people. 10 years after that, Abraham is living in the land that God has shown him, meaning he's now 85 at least, and he still has no child. The promise is getting so unbelievable that Abraham and Sarah try to create Abraham's offspring through Sarah's servant Hagar. But at 99, God comes to Abraham and says, that son Ishmael that you created on your own, he's not the son of promise. He's not the offspring. The blessing will come through a son that is born supernaturally. That's the point. And it is supernatural. The only thing more supernatural than this son that Sarah has would be if someone somewhere sometime has a son and she's a virgin. This is how God works. God says the son of promise is going to be supernaturally born. Your wife Sarah is going to bear a son. Verse 16, I will bless her, and moreover I will give you a son by her. I will bless her, and she shall become nations. Kings of people shall come from her. Then Abram fell on his face and laughed and said to himself, shall a child be born to a man who is 100 years old? Shall Sarah, who is 90 years old, bear a child? And Abraham said to God, oh, that Ishmael might live before you. You could see his heart, can't you? Like, we already have a son. This is getting just too hard to believe. Lord, just bless Ishmael. Bless Ishmael. God says, no, your wife Sarah will bear you a son, and you shall call his name Isaac. I will establish my covenant with him, the supernatural born one, as an everlasting covenant, and his offspring after him. What's being promised by God here is impossible. That's the point. It is impossible. When Sarah heard about this, this is her response. Chapter 18, verse 12, Sarah laughed to herself, saying, after I am worn out. She's a little bit more blunt. Sarah laughs and says, after I'm worn out and my Lord is old, shall I have pleasure? The Lord said to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh and say, shall I indeed bear a child now that I'm old? Is anything too hard for the Lord? He says, at the appointed time I will return to you about this time next year, and Sarah will have a son. And the point is really that however impossible it seemed, and it seemed increasingly impossible for Abraham and Sarah, and however impossible it seemed, when God said this, Abraham trusted God. He sent away Ishmael, and Ishmael was blessed on his own, but they sent away Ishmael, and they waited for the son of promise, who did come as promised. Because what was impossible for him and Sarah was not impossible for God. Faith in God is an act of humility. It's an act of humility. Because what God must do in you to prosper you, to flourish you, to make you fulfill the purpose for which he created you, what God must do in you is so beyond you that it's laughable. What must happen in you and me is so beyond us that it's laughable. It's really not even within the realm of possibility. It's a child at 90. It's a child at 90 for a barren womb from a 100-year-old man. It's impossible. That's the point. What must God do in you? What must God do in you to make you, who maybe had no good father as a role model, to make you into a father that he wants you to be? What God must do to you and in you to make you the courageous servant that he wants you to be? Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. That's a good one. Me? What God must do to make you not only be fruitful in this life, but what must God do in you to make you fit to dwell with him forever in the end? It's so beyond you and me that it's laughable. But faith stops laughing and says, is anything too hard for the Lord? And then maybe you look at yourself and you laugh again. But then you look to God and you say, I believe. I believe. Faith also progressively challenges you. This is just a way of saying, really, that faith is a lifestyle. When you trust in the Lord, as you should, it's not a one-time event. It's not a one-off. I had a good week, had a good day, had a good moment with the Lord, maybe even had a good year. It's not a one-time event. A life of faith is a life of faith. It's a life of faith. It's a lifestyle. It's not a day or an hour or a moment. As soon as you've trusted in God through one event in your life, what's on the other side of that one event is another event. And you're further informed through that process of circumstances that you're faced with. You're further informed of your inability to face what's ahead. And then you must further trust in the Lord again, that he will do what you're unable to do. Abraham isn't just faced with the difficulty of leaving his family and going to a land that God will show him. When he gets to that land, he's faced with a famine in the land. And then he's faced with the circumstances of the bad choices that he makes because of the famine. And then he's faced with the increasing obstacle of him and Sarah's age, and on and on and on it goes. In the middle of it all, Lot gets kidnapped. Like it's just a progression of things that he must walk by faith in and through. In other words, faith is a constant and ongoing trusting God to either do what you couldn't do or fix what you did. A life of faith is a life of faith. It's a lifestyle that you embrace and hold on to. And finally, that lifestyle of faith will transform you and grow you and make you more and more like the God whom you are walking with. Faith naturally grows you. It naturally grows you. Genesis 12 opens with God calling Abraham to leave his family, to go to the land that he will show him, so that there God will multiply his offspring. Genesis 22 opens with God calling Abraham to now take that offspring and go to a mountain that God will show him and sacrifice that offspring. Genesis 22 is an altogether different kind of faith and trust, isn't it? And I would suggest that the Abraham of Genesis 12 would not at all be able to do what he's called to do in Genesis 22. And what makes it possible? What makes it possible? It's not just the 10 chapters that separate the two events. It's the 60 years that those 10 chapters represent. It is the 60 years of walking with the Lord by faith. 60 years of trusting in God to do what you can't do. 60 years of evidence that God is trustworthy. 60 years of failing and seeing how God even is powerful enough to work in and through your failures. 60 years of walking by faith with God has made Abraham into a man now who at about 135, 60 years of walking with God has made Abraham into a man who is now very much in the likeness of the God that he has been walking with. He's so much in the likeness of God that he's willing to give up his own son for the sake of relationship. That's how like God Abraham is after all of those transformative years. And that's what he does in Genesis 22. After these things, what is these things? 60 years. After all of these things, walking with God for this time, God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham, he said, here I am. He said, take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I will show you. So Abraham rose early in the morning. Read through this account and recognize it's not just that he does it, it's the way that he does it. It's the way that he responds to God. Remember back in the garden when God was calling to Adam. He was calling to Adam, and what was Adam doing? Hiding, right? Here God says, Abraham, and he says, here I am. Take your son, he says. Offer him as a burnt offering. Verse 3, Abraham rose early in the morning to do it. Saddled his donkey, took 2 of his young men with him and his son Isaac. He cut the wood for the burnt offering and arose and went to the place of which God had told him. On the 3rd day, Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place from afar. Then Abraham said to his young men, stay here with the donkey, and I and the boy will go over there and worship. Not sacrifice, worship. And will come again to you. Verse 5, Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac his son, and he took in his hand the fire and the knife. It's not just the knife, the burnt offering. And so they went, both of them together, and Isaac said to his father, Abraham, my father. And he said, here I am, my son. He said, behold the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering? Abraham said, God will provide for himself the lamb for a burnt offering, my son. So they both went together. And when they came to the place of which God had told them, Abraham built the altar there and laid the wood in order and bound Isaac his son and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. And then Abraham reached out his hand and took the knife to slaughter his son. After looking at the significance of holy mountains thus far, we should understand that, of course, Abraham's journey with God is going to lead him to another holy sacred mountain. But here's the surprise with Abraham. Here's the surprise. Unlike what happened on those other sacred holy mountains, Adam in his garden, Noah at Ararat, Abraham is fit to be there. Abraham is fit to be there on that mountain. Because again, his journey with God by faith has made him so much like God that he is actually willing, like God, to give his own son on that mountain for the sake of relationship. And of course, we know the story. God doesn't let him, right? God stops him. Because, of course, only one person will ever give his only son so that man and God can walk in relationship through this life and dwell together in the end. And that is God. And so God provides another sacrifice. Verse 13, and Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him was a ram caught in a thicket by the horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called the name of that place, the Lord will provide. That's 60 years of walking with God coming out. The Lord will provide. As it is said to this day, on the mount of the Lord it shall be provided. In church, 2,000 years later it was. God did provide on the very same mountain, the one offspring, the firstborn of God, the one that was called unrighteous and separated from God and killed on the very same mountain, so that those who trust in God and wish to walk with him by faith, who are unrighteous, can be called righteous, so that they can walk with God in the end and be with him in his dwelling place in the end forever. God did provide. But it is this faith, this is God's way. From Abraham, you need to interpret the whole rest of the Bible this way. From Abraham on, the entrance into the family of God. God's plan for humans is that he provides a way for us to walk with him. Because he counts our faith unites us with Christ, and he counts our faith as righteousness. That enables us to walk with him, and that walking with him through the things of life does all of these things that we talked about. It transforms us into his image so that when we're at home with him in the end, we're truly at home. Lord, we thank you for this truth. We thank you for Abraham's story. We thank you for your plan. That it's not just 1,000 tries that man gets at being perfect again and again and again. That you have provided a way for us to simply trust in you, and that you call that trust righteousness, which allows us to walk with you through this life, even though we are imperfect. And that walk will transform us, Lord. That walk will make us like you progressively. And that walk will ultimately lead to dwelling with you on your holy mountain in the end. Thank you for this glorious truth, Lord. Thank you for your plan. Thank you, Jesus, for dying in our place, for being cursed on our behalf so that we can be blessed. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. We pray all these things in your name, Jesus. Amen.